So come along on this video. I'm going to sort of show you just the difference between fringe deer and wild deer, and how they are just a total different animal, so to speak. They live in different areas. They're not necessarily out in that open meadow. Just because it's out in the bush, doesn't replicate a paddock scenario. There's more to it all, but it's just, it's a different ball game. So see if this transition helps. We'll see if this little video helps your transition from paddock dwelling into a bit more of a state forest goer, that vast landscape. And the real challenge of the Sambar deer, I believe, is out there in that wild country, not necessarily those fringe deer. Anyway, that's my opinion. So let's go along and see what we see. In this video, I'm going to try and explain subtle differences with chasing Sambar out in the forest as opposed to out in the fringe. I think everyone sort of initially starts off hunting on the fringe. It's a lot more predictable. The deer are there crack of dawn, and it's a matter of sort of intercepting or spot and stalking. Well, I'd like to try and help you guys transition from being a paddock dweller into more of a mountain ranger that can just roam mountains, so to speak, looking for deer, Sambar deer. Out in the forest, in the mountains, they're a little bit more unpredictable in terms of they could be anywhere, and you have to learn the animal a bit more than learning the layout of the paddock. And it's no secret that to secure a larger antlered Sambar stag, hunting on the fringe on the properties in paddocks is a much higher success rate. It's a total different hunt, and it's totally different hunting in general. You see, it's just the evolution of the Sambar hunter who starts seeing the Sambar in the paddocks, and then you soon start chasing them a bit further behind that fence up the hill or up the gullies where they came from. On the fringes, there's a higher population of deer, or a higher concentration of deer coming into those paddocks, so it can seem like there's a lot more deer each hunt that you go on. And then the times that you have hunted the forest, sometimes it's like, well, this is a needle in a haystack. And finding the deer themselves can be quite a challenge. Quite often just honks, departures, or just hearing one depart.
Get out of here. Woo!
Being able to look at the landscape of just a state forest or mountain range, and then pinpointing or narrowing down areas where you think the deer will be, obviously improves your odds out of sight, as opposed to just blindly walking around looking for deer. I've talked to numerous hunters, and they are actually just walking around the bush looking for the brown deer. And that sort of might sound silly to some, and might even sound silly to you. Of course they're walking around looking for deer. What else are you doing?
Bloody cheers to the deers, I reckon.
But that's not the point. See, the deer can be anywhere in that forest or in that landscape, and you're trying to narrow down where that deer is, as opposed to spot and stalking or glassing it from a mile away. The only way to do this is actually hunt the area by the sign. That also might sound a bit silly, but of course, you want to hunt areas where the sign is. Sign is only there once the animal has been there. So fresh poo, there's a deer not far away. The tracks and everything is a real indicator, and you can even start working out where that animal's coming feeding and where they may be bedding. Whereas it's totally different than down on that fringe country, because yes, the deer will come down they come down every night, they feed all night, then they make their way back up in the morning. Few variables, mostly in the weather, depending on how quick or how slow they do that and what they do and how they get there. When they're in the bush, it's a total different ball game. There's nooks, crannies, crevices, sunny faces, patches of shade, clumps of trees with shade that can put the deer at any place at any time, totally depending on that weather. So I've probably been there myself, just stumbling around the bush looking for deer. You don't see any, but you like spook heaps. And then it's later on down the track that you start working out that you got to look for the sign, and you got to hunt the sign. It's no use walking, example, 4Ks up into the bush to then hunt when you walk past heaps of sign on the way in there. Yeah, you might have looked at Google up at that spot, but you're walking past hot sign. It's deer there, is it stag sign? It's worth pursuing. Being able to just go on the fly and take a left or take a right, not necessarily at a crossroad, but just in a valley, you can go, right, I've got to go up in here. That's where the deer are. They're clearly not down in here. I've seen no sign, whatever. Then you start prospecting for sign. The whole point of finding that nugget of gold, that sambar at the end of that game, at the end of that tracks, is like prospecting to find where it may be in this vast landscape. A lot of the fringe hunting, in my experiences over the years, has been spot and stalk has been the best method. If you get up there into a glassing position before light or right on crack of dawn, you'll quite often see the deer departing the paddocks right on that first light. And depending on the property's pressure and the farming activity, they may stay around for up to an hour or so, especially just in that fringe tree line. It gives the hunter a lot more opportunity to close gap and be on their tail as they get into the bush, which then is quite often only a short stalk up a gully, and you'll run into that deer as it's slowed down getting off the paddocks. Quite often the Sambar hinds will mill around a bit feeding, especially with young, in the cover of the trees. Whereas the Sambar stag is more likely to just climb directly out once he's had a gutful. He'll climb straight up into his bed. So in that situation, a hunter that situates himself between feeding and bedding area on a known or likely trail, or trail with good vantage of several other trails, can quite often be a pretty much guaranteed hit. Unless, of course, the thermals or weather changes that. Of course, on the fringe also, you can shoot them at 400 meters if you want, quite easily. You can shoot them long range. You don't have to run across and close the gaps or intersect him further in the bush. So that appeals to quite a few. But as far as stalking them, it's quite often walking them up from where you last saw them head off into the bush, as opposed to finding them just in that random vast landscape in the bush, or seeing them cut through a gap of trees a couple hundred meters across the gully. So yeah, there's all these little subtle differences. Hope you're picking up on all that, and I won't bang on too much about it all, but we'll see some vision and see what goes on. Quite often before I'll go into an area, I'll have a pretty good idea via like Google Maps on where I want to concentrate on, And on that map I'll have sections marked out in terms of feeding, bedding areas, and good glassing areas. Because even just with that Google knowledge, you'll have some idea of what the layout may be like. And I'll study that quite extensively in the lead up to that hunt. So in my mind, I've got a pretty good map and layout 3D of how this big system looks. Know where the sun's going to hit, a fair bit of an idea. You can suss out which way the wind's probably going to run, especially from the weather reports, etc., close areas. It's a very variable thing in the bush, up in the mountains, but you just got to adapt to hunting with it to your advantage. And just because the wind does swell doesn't mean the hunt's over, or it's not worth doing it because the wind's not blowing in, like the wind's blowing into that area. Just go to another area and suss it out. Quite often big hunts and big deer get taken just when, you know, you take a different route, or you walk into the area a bit different, or you just wanted to see what was around the corner and sheesh, here he is. So it's exploring that's a big part of the challenge in getting those sambar stags. You'll note that in a lot of busy or well-known river systems or camping areas, there simply is no big stags within a kuwai of that area. They do come in at times, but they're not living there. This will help you just get that kickback, I call it. Think of a footy field. You just go, everyone can kick up to 50 metres, boom. Look on a map where everyone would walk in a day up there and back. And then think, alright, another kick from where they'll go a day. That's where I want to hunt. And that's been my little philosophy for quite a while. Just been a kickback from where everyone is, and I've passed that on to advice onto a few people, and feedback's been pretty good in reports of, yeah, a lot more deer just being away from where everyone typically goes. So that's just a little tip for you. Keep that to yourselves.